Action News and WTAE-TV like never before.
During the next few weeks, you'll be hearing about new segments on Action News and the ways you can get involved with the stories we cover.
You'll see changes in how we serve the community and how we'll use your feedback to not only improve Channel 4, but to help make Pittsburgh a better place to live.
Channel 4 is taking action for Pittsburgh.
And we're taking action for you.
Regularly scheduled programming will not be seen at this time in order to bring you the following WTAE-TV special presentation. A crisis at home.
What precipitated this?
And is this tragedy a setback for
He said, I have one bullet left. Which one of you should I use it on?
We all knew those people. They were us. And it could have happened to one of us.
Good evening, I'm Ellen Wiggin.
And I'm Mike Clark.
Tonight, we welcome you to this special program, A Crisis at Home. We're joined by our neighbors, friends, concerned citizens, all to talk about the tragedy that happened just 2 weeks ago in Wilkesburg.
With our colleagues Scott Baker and Michelle Wright tonight, we will discuss what happened during the tragic event that left 3 men dead and 2 critically injured. During tonight's program, we'll also explore why violence has become a way of life in our country and discuss what we can do to work together to create solutions.
We'll meet family members of the victims, local experts on crime prevention, and civic leaders. We want your input also, so please log on to thepittsburghchannel.com. Submit your comments and your questions. We want to hear from you. Now, you can see there the web page, right where it says Crisis at Home. Click on there, and you will get directions on how to form your questions and how to write them in. So click on the Crisis at Home, and you can get your questions into us.
And we'll be reading the questions that you supply us with. We will also be supplying a great deal of information throughout tonight's show. And if you don't have access to the internet, we will gladly send you all the information, including phone numbers and addresses of organizations and groups. Simply send us a self-addressed stamp envelope to A Crisis at Home, care of WTAE-TV, 400 Ardmore Boulevard, Pittsburgh, PA 15221-3090.
Mary Manella from Penn Hill sent us this message. She is the mother of a 2nd grader, and she writes us, as I'm sitting here writing this, I wonder what the world will be like for my son as he gets older. I do know that every day when I take my son to school, I do the best thing that I can and say, God bless you and keep you safe. Thank you very much for writing, Mary. Keeping our community safe is what this program is all about. So let's get started with it. We're going to go right to Michelle Wright and to Sean Yancey. Michelle.
Yes, Allie, we are here talking with Sean now because, Sean, you were right in the middle of everything as it was happening 2 weeks ago. We heard your live reports on your cell phone, crouched down behind a news truck for safety. It must have been really frightening.
This was really frightening. When we arrived, we were probably one of the first news crews on the scene, and we were about 50 yards away from police who were also crouched down behind their vehicles with guns drawn, who they told us seconds earlier the suspect had just been firing gunshots at them. I think the most frightening and for the most scary, it was for parents who were concerned throughout this whole ordeal because their children were inside a daycare in this building where suspect Ronald Taylor was holed up in.
And where is Ronald Taylor now?
Ronald Taylor is in Mayview Hospital. He's undergoing a psychiatric evaluation. They're trying to determine if he is fit to stand trial or not. But right now we want to take you back and show you how this all began.
It began shortly after 11 a.m. with a single gunshot in the Woodside Garden Apartments.
A report of a gunshot wound, Wood Street. The actor is supposed to be on the scene there and does have a weapon.
From there, a chain of events unfolded that would change Wilkinsburg forever. Witnesses say Ronald Taylor got angry with the maintenance worker because they were taking too long to fix a door in his apartment. They say he shot worker John Kroll, then torched his own apartment.
He looked at Andy. Andy said, don't do anything, don't do this, don't cause a problem, and then he turned and shot Johnny in the neck.
By the time police arrived at the apartments, the suspect was gone. On to his next stops.
We have a report of another gunshot victim at the Burger King, Penn Avenue. We have a victim shot in the head at McDonald's, Penn Avenue, also that one at Metro.
Police say Taylor shot and killed former priest Joseph Healy at the Burger King. Then they say he fired a fatal shot at Emil Sanyalevici as he sat waiting for his food in the McDonald's drive-thru. Police say Taylor also shot, critically injuring McDonald's manager Stephen Bostard and customer Richard Klinger. With the gunman still on the loose, police began sealing off the area. They believe Taylor ran into Christine McRae's apartment next.
And he said, well, I'm not going to hurt any black people. I'm just out to kill all white people. That's
exactly what he said.
Police say Taylor left McCrae's apartment and fired shots at them before running into the Penn West building and taking hostages. Minutes later, the SWAT team arrived and began evacuations. First the adults, then the children.
We had contact with the daycare on the 3rd floor.
Then SWAT went into the building and convinced Ronald Taylor to surrender. He emerged in handcuffs, facing a number of charges, including 3 counts of murder. In the days following the shootings, family and friends said their painful goodbyes to 55-year-old John Kroll of Cabot, Butler County, 20-year-old Pitt physics major Emil Sanyeli-Vici, and 71-year-old storyteller Joseph Healy.
He cared about everybody. Everybody cared about him. He always left something in your heart.
Police later found racist writings in Taylor's burned-down apartment, bolstering the theory the shootings were hate crimes. Community leaders prayed the fear in Wilkinsburg would soon be replaced by peace.
We want to bring the community together as much as possible to pray and ask God to bring about healing and restoration and some peace of heart.
We are going to talk about racism, about violence, about all of the issues that swirl around the events that happened that day in Wilkinsburg. But to begin now our conversation, we'd like to talk to those for whom this has just been the moments of anguish. And with me now, Frankie Healy, the wife of Joseph Healy, shot and killed that day, Gerald Brewer, the police chief of Wilkinsburg, and also Dr. David Freeman, who had an encounter with the gunman that we will talk about. I'm going to begin with you. Obviously, the thoughts and the well wishes of the people who speak so lovingly of your husband can't replace him, but that has to be of some encouragement to you, the legacy that he left.
It's been overwhelming. The response has been overwhelming.
Would he have anticipated that?
No, not to this extent. Just to a certain extent, yes. People who have heard him tell stories and over the years, but this was overwhelming. Yeah. He never would have expected this much.
Overwhelming, I might imagine, to come face to face with a gunman, David Freeman, and I imagine that you have thought a lot about that in these last 2 weeks.
Yes, quite a bit. It's probably changed my life quite a bit.
And what are the things that are central in your mind as you kind of contemplate this? When you say it's changed your life?
I think mainly the way I look at things have changed in the last 2 weeks. I've looked at experiences differently and tried not to dwell on it, but have seen that, you know, I know how lucky I was to come out of that experience, and my staff as well. As well off as we did.
As a police chief, Gerald Brewer, you look at a community in block by block, street by street, statistics and whatnot. Has your own perception of your community changed in this time?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I marvel at the strength that the community has. We've always known that Wilkinsburg was able to have that inner strength. Taking back their streets over the past 3 years has been a remarkable accomplishment for them. Crime has come down significantly over those 3 years, and during this tragic event, the citizens came out and did things that are not generally seen today in law enforcement. That is being visible and helping out, giving descriptions and giving us information as opposed to the way things used to be.
And it really is a community that this event seems so unlike the community that we know, those of us who work here, and I'm down there several times a week, right in the downtown, and it just startled me to see that. Let me ask you about your officers, about the men and women who make up your force. We've heard your official statements, we've talked to some of them on television, but just around the squad room, how are they talking about this?
They realized that they were tested on a grand scale, but they also looked at it as a team effort. It was a very comprehensive operation that they had to undertake. They had to rely on training over the past few years. We were fortunate to have a lot of veteran officers on the street, and they came together very well and functioned just extremely well as a team, including the agencies that came and responded to assist us. So they feel like they were tested, and they believed that they were successful and
increased their camaraderie.
Exactly.
Joseph Healy obviously had worked in so many ways to build his community, primarily telling stories to, it seems like, generations of young children. If it had been different, if it hadn't have been him, if it had been someone else, you might imagine that he might have been the kind of person who would come to an event like this and sit in the audience and maybe ask a question or share a thought. If it hadn't have been him and he were here tonight in that position, what would he say about Wilkinsburg, and what would he want people to know about this event?
Well, there's no way I can tell you what he would say, because he'd say things beautifully. I think he'd be very proud of Wilkinsburg.
And about the ugliness of all of this, the message that the world saw as they looked in, via all news cable channels, that would have been the kind of thing that would have broken his heart, I imagine.
Right, but this was the action of one man, and the town, it just came together. It's a wonderful community, and it proved it was a wonderful community.
Let me ask you, Dr. Freeman, about the community, because you obviously not only encountered this up front, but you are a doctor in that community. You see the people. As you've talked to them since then, as they've come into your office, what is that conversation like?
Our patients have been extremely supportive, somewhat curious about, what it was for us, so I know that they really care about what we went through. But universally, most of them have come in with words of support, and some of them came in right away. We got numerous phone calls from people saying, "We're glad you're okay," and the outpouring of caring was really been amazing. Almost every patient room I go into now, they make mention that how glad they are that it worked out as well as it did for us.
Is this now a time of reflection, learning for your staff to teach others, to help others?
Certainly, everything's a learning experience, and we worked very hard to go back and debrief and to look at the things that we did, listen to the tapes, and to make sure that if we have another event such as this, that we perform adequately and that we learn from our mistakes. But it's always a learning experience for us in the field, and very tragic circumstances, and you really are always looking at your people to make sure that they're strong and have that intestinal fortitude to bounce back in case there's something in the future for us.
Well, I thank the three of you for sharing very different stories, some painful stories, some ones that are encouraging. And I should mention there's even a website. I think it's joehealy.com, and
yes,
it has some remarkable stories on there. You can even click and hear one and be inspired. I thank you. Sally and Mike?
Scott, you mentioned the website. We've been encouraging our viewers over the last 3 days to log on to the PittsburghChannel.com and supply us with questions from the community. We're going to share another one of those emails with you right now. This is from Richard Schneeman from the Wilkinsburg Police Department, and he writes, does anyone agree that if there is a need to have any closure from this incident, that people, including the media, need to let it go? We've been hearing a lot of this over the last couple of days.
Scott, I'd like to direct this to your guests, if I may. What would bring closure for all of you? Do you think too much coverage prevents that? And Chief Brewer, this is actually one of the members of your department who wrote this.
I firmly believe that communications are very, very important, and I believe a story needs to be told. I believe there's a lot of stories in the community, everything from the inner strength of our community, which was amazing to me, to see a predominantly African-American community openly grieve for the victims, pull together with the candlelight vigils, and you all showed those stories, and I think that was very important to the nation.
All right. Mrs. Healy?
Well, I did say to someone I don't intend to become a professional widow, but yes, the story has to be told, and people have to realize that Wilkinsburg worked because of the people who live here. This shooting was an aberration of a sick person.
Thanks very much, Mrs. Healy. And we'll be back right after this. Where you can donate to several organizations to help keep the memory of Joseph Healy alive. The Friends of Living Library.
Generations Together, the University of Pittsburgh, several others came up with this website. Scott mentioned it before. Just log on to joehealy.com. In many of our lifetimes, we have witnessed 3 major assassinations, the shootings of political leaders, including President Reagan, George Wallace, Harvey Milk, and we have lived through Kent State and the recent school shootings that only seem to get more horrific each month.
Sadly, it seems that violence is still so much a part of the fabric of American culture. The shootings on March 1st brought the issue close to home. In this segment, we will touch on possible reasons as to why we live in a violent world. And here to help us along is Michelle Wright. Michelle?
Yes, Allie, as Mike said, the violence that we saw here 2 weeks ago was just part of a bigger puzzle of violence that's happening all across America. And to help us understand more about that, we go now to Nina Pineda. She was on the scene during the shootings, and she talked with some of the men and women affected whose lives will never be the same.
He took the three of us in the back, and he said he had one bullet left, and which one of you three should I use it on?
First held at gunpoint and then trapped in a parking lot fearing flying bullets. The nurse at a doctor's office who escaped shooting suspect Ronald Taylor was thrown into the national spotlight.
Realizing that I could die at this point, and thinking with my faith that there was a better place I might be going to.
A place where 6-year-olds don't kill each other, the Allison Park wife and mother went on to say, questioning why America has seemingly become a society of violence. Some believe hope in an innocent nation was in seconds replaced with horror by an assassin's bullet in Texas. Violence took the famous and the anonymous close by and a world away. In our schools and homes, in big cities and rural towns, Paducah, Jonesboro, existing in obscurity like Wilkinsburg until now. The violence brought home seems inescapable.
Get this out of here! You know, this stuff doesn't work. You expect me to get up here today and talk to you about the issues of faith when I put it all on the line and lost?
The ministers of our time struggle to find answers to why so many stray from the flock, motivated by hatred and prejudice, acting out from either despair or anger.
For the most part, it's people of faith themselves, of any faith, who are just overwhelmed because you say, how can there be a good God if things like this happen?
But still, the faithful pray for an end to the violence. With a child leading the way, they hope time and time again that peace can overcome tragedy.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Things really shouldn't be the way they are because people are killing other people too much, and it's just too much violence.
Why, he doesn't know. But the boy walked in the Wilkinsburg Peace Walk this Sunday anyway, wishing for a different world.
Somewhat tranquil, peaceful. It's just a serene place where there's not much fighting and war.
His little brother wants the same, a wish their mother knows she can't promise will come true.
If people will learn not to kill, but to love and be joyful, then the world will be a better place.
And we are going to talk more about how we can make the world a better place. In the meantime, for those of you just joining us, this is a live show until 8 o'clock. We want to hear from you. Please email us with your comments and suggestions to thepittsburghchannel.com, and we will try to address your comments during this show. Right now, Scott Baker with some more interviews for us. Scott?
Yes, Michelle. In fact, I'll mention that we did just get an email, just as an example, an email that came in asking the question about the role of the NAACP in rebuilding community and how they will assist in the healing process. And it's a good question. We do want to note, because it was a part of the promotion for this program, that we had anticipated having representatives of the NAACP here and had been told that they would be. And then shortly before the program, in the last day or two, we were told that they would not participate. So there will not be participation by the NAACP here tonight. A question we would like to have put to them here tonight, coming in via email. We want to talk now about this issue of violence. It seems to be the eternal question. And to help me sort through all of this, I have three guests. I have Reg Laser in the middle, who is a special education professor at California University of Pennsylvania. Also Edward Mulvey, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh. And Pat Valentine, who is with Allegheny County's Department of Human Services. Let me start with the observation that Frankie Healy made right there at the end before we went to the last break, where she called this just the aberration of a sick individual. Is that really the essence of it here, something that we can't get away from as long as there are going to be sick people, that these aberrations will occur?
I think this is an aberration. I mean, this is a horrible, tragic event that
in the absence of a history of violence or other indications, I don't know anyone that could have predicted it, and I think it's an aberration and horrible because we all lose control, and it's very, very scary for the whole community.
Reggie Laser, you look at behavior, you look at predictors, and when we say, you know, there was nothing that we could have seen in this man, no history of violence, that's kind of a frightening thought, isn't it? That somebody could just snap at any point like that.
Well, I don't like to use those exact terms. We talk about people as snapping, but what we're talking about is a history of behavior that's built up to this. There have to be predictors in terms of people's behaviors. I deal with children, I deal with adults. I like to take the mystery out of behavior. If you learn how to observe behavior, you learn that there are usually clear consequences for why people do things. Now, that's hard to explain in this circumstance, right. But we see this pattern of physical violence, of verbal aggression, and so on, starting with kids. I deal with 3-year-old children who routinely attack other kids and yell and scream.
That's scary.
And the point is, it accomplishes something for them. It performs a function for them, and that's what works for them. And so they use again.
You have someone with a question?
Ambrose. Gina Ambrose is with me. Come on down here for a second. She's 16, and listening to all of the psychology behind why is not very encouraging. She just wants it to stop. Actually, her mother was held at gunpoint by Ronald Taylor.
We saw her in that piece from Good Morning America.
Right. I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm a 16-year-old girl who goes to high school, and now not only do I have to worry about my own safety, but my mom's. And it's just getting ridiculous. I think that this violence is it's crazy. It's very, very crazy. And I just think that, like, people need to talk to the kids more. They need to talk to kids in schools, in elementary schools, in high schools. They need to talk to the kids because they're the ones that decide to do this. And I don't know, it's just very sad.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, it's obviously the thing that's on all of our hearts. And let me ask you, Pat Valentine, you're the Deputy Director of the program dealing with behavioral health here in Allegheny County. How do you, when confronted with the awesome tragedy that we've seen, even think about constructing programs to help community to try and eradicate violence?
Well, I think there are a number of different types of programs, and I think she just mentioned a very important one, and that's teaching kids how to deal with anger, how to deal with feelings of rage or feelings of when they feel anxious or like they're losing control. Parents are very important with that. Schools are very important with that. Obviously, the faith community is very important in terms of that.
And using all of those structures. Is this, Ed Mulvey, just, you know, it goes back to Cain and Abel. Is this something that's always going to be with us that we can never eradicate?
Well, I think there's always going to be violence. I mean, we would hope to get rid of as much of it as we can, but there's always going to be events, and as pointed out, there are kids who start young and progress along that path. The earlier we can deal with it, the better, but we're never going to find everybody. We're never going to be able to intervene with everybody. And we don't have technologies that are magic. Right. You do the best you can with a lot of people.
And is there hope for those 3-year-olds that you see?
Absolutely. The issue rests with responsibility. If children are not held responsible and accountable for their behavior, then they'll continue doing things. I have 3-year-olds who tell me, you know, I can't do that because I've got a problem. We, as professionals, oftentimes, we as parents and so on, have convinced kids that there's something wrong with them. That's why I don't like to use the term sick, because I have so many children and adults who say, it's beyond my control. My rage made me do it. Well, parents and children, again, have to be held responsible. If parents in Columbine were financially and legally responsible for their children, they would have been in that garage seeing what they were doing out there when they were making bombs and they were going out and buying guns and so on.
So we have to take individual responsibility. Is there a need for greater responsibility, Pat Valentine, on the part of our leaders, though?
There's absolutely a need for greater responsibility on the part of everybody. Community responsibility, somebody mentioned earlier how Wilkinsburg responded to this. Wilkinsburg responded so admirably to this. It's almost unbelievable how they just pulled together. They took responsibility for healing their community, not pointing fingers at anybody. And I think that's what we need to do for all of our citizens.
And it is a process that is ongoing. Thank you for your thoughts. It's complicated. Michelle? Sally and Mike.
Okay, thanks very much, Scott. We have been getting your emails into our PittsburghChannel.com webpage, and here's one of the questions. Did this man roam the streets without mental health support? Why?
That brings up a good question. Pat Valentine, before we go to the break, could you explain to us, are there enough programs working in Allegheny County, and are we putting the Ronald Taylors out on the streets, or should they be getting treatment somewhere?
There's always more need for services than resources for services. However, it's important to know that there are a tremendous number of wonderful services out there. There are services for everybody, from people who are just feeling stress and anxiety to people who are seriously mentally ill and who need intensive services on a 24-hour per day basis. Do we have enough? No, we don't have enough. But are there wonderful services out there? Absolutely.
All right, Pat, thank you very much.
All right, and we're going to be coming back with more, this time about the role of guns in the violence in America.
The recent state of deadly shootings across our country has added momentum to gun control measures long pending before Congress. Gun rights groups say this legislation would infringe on the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. Now, one of our viewers, Josh Gibson, sent us an email stating that criminals don't obey laws or get their guns through legal means. Gun laws restrict only the law-abiding citizen.
Gun control advocates support stricter provisions, including a call to limit one handgun purchase per month. Well, joining us in a moment to answer questions on gun control is City Council President Bob O'Connor and Mike Slavonic from the National Rifle Association. But first, we would like to welcome Derwin Rushing from Goods for Guns. He's here to provide us with a creative solution to getting guns off the streets. In fact, your Goods for Guns is the most successful and the largest gun buyback program in the country. You said even in the world, Mr. Rushing.
Yeah, that's right. We've collected about 6,000 guns over the last 6 years in the city of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County.
No government funding. This is from private corporations, individuals' contributions?
That's correct. That's correct. We get, we get grants or funding from different foundations, and I can list those for you, but we also get donations from individuals, people who just write us $10 and $15 and $25 checks, but also the foundations are involved too, but we don't get any government money as of yet. We really have to scramble around to get money. And,
I have to ask you, and it may seem like there'd be an obvious answer to this, do you oppose handguns, the sale of handguns in America?
We're a strictly voluntary program. We don't take any position on the gun issues. I think I can safely say that people in our organization cover all ends of that spectrum. And the people in our organization who I know are gun collectors, they say that it's responsible gun ownership. That's what this is about. That the program that we have is if you don't want your gun, you don't know anything about it, you don't know if it's loaded, if it is loaded, how to unload it, you just want it out of the house for whatever reason, that we give you a vehicle and incentive to do that. So we're a strictly voluntary program.
This issue can tear apart a community with one neighbor against another neighbor on this issue. Does your organization have volunteers from both sides of the aisle on this? You have people who support gun rights and people who are against handguns come together and volunteer to collect the guns?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, the people who support gun rights, they see it as responsible gun ownership, that incidents like this occur make the responsible gun owners look bad. So they see it as a way of creating responsibility for gun owners.
And having people come together.
That's correct, yes.
It's not always the case, though. Scott Baker joins us now to continue this debate. Scott.
That's right, Mike. We talked about in our last segment about individual responsibility and not shifting blame, but there is an effort to hold people accountable, even the manufacturers of guns. And City Council President Bob O'Connor is joining us, along with Mike Slavonic from the National Rifle Association. And Councilman O'Connor, you do want these gun manufacturers to be held more accountable.
Yes, it's one of the only products, and I consider it a product, that isn't regulated by the federal government. Everything is regulated, from cars to aspirins to teddy bears. Actually, a year ago, before Columbine, we were here debating, I think in this studio, I believe we can make a safer product, a child-proof product.
So Bob O'Connor wants to hold the gun manufacturers more accountable. Mr. Slavonic, the National Rifle Association has been emphasizing holding the people who misuse the guns more accountable. Is that where the answer is?
That's true, but I find it hard to believe that gun dealers and gun manufacturers are not being held responsible, because the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm governs the regulation of firearm sales and manufacturing.
So there are some regs.
So there's a number of regs that the dealers have to go through. And I'm going to tell you, quite frankly, if you talk to some of the dealers are very, very nervous at times, at certain times, because the massive amount of regulations that they have to comply with. They are constantly calling and talking to the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms to make sure they are in compliance with the laws, because the laws are confusing.
Now, one of the things that's been talked about a lot is in the last few weeks has been the gun locks, which are not an expensive item, not a complicated item. In fact, I think, Michelle, you have somebody with you who actually has one of the gun locks with them.
That's right. This is Robert Flipping. He's with the Allegheny County Health Department. Go ahead and stand up and show us what you brought. The Allegheny Health Department has a program. It's been going on for about 5 years. And tell us exactly what you're doing and how it works.
Okay, we have a gun trigger lock here. We've been distributing these for over 5 years. These are free of charge. We would like to see gun owners become responsible. If you own a gun, be a responsible gun owner, and therefore employ a trigger lock. This can save a life. It's a very simple mechanism. It locks in.
Let me make sure we can see this at home. Can you guys see this okay?
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
See, it locks in.
And flip this over a little bit better. And this is a toy gun, I might want to add.
Oh, it's loaded.
It's unloaded.
Yes, it is.
So there are keys right here, and all you have to do is lock it. And how will this help?
It would help because if a child gained access to a firearm, they could not fire the trigger. It wouldn't go off. We're losing too many kids who come in contact with guns, and when kids and guns get together, bad things usually occur thereafter.
All right, Michelle, thank you.
And I want to ask one more question. You said that you've been doing this for 5 years. How has this been working?
Our program has been working. We've distributed over 5,000 trigger locks. We've talked to over 16,000 children and over 5,000 adults about firearm safety.
And that's a first step.
Yes, it is.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Flipping, for joining us. Scott?
So a little click and a turn, and a gun like that cannot be fired. Obviously, it's an item that works. Should it be a mandatory item?
No, we don't think it should be mandatory, because the concern we have is that any type of mechanical device is apt to fail. Those type of trigger locks are, depending on the type of one you buy, some of them are of a lesser quality. You can fire the firearm by pulling back on the trigger lock. Now, the one thing you got to notice when they were handling the gun, there's nothing to prevent that gun from being loaded. That gun can be loaded, and if the trigger lock is not of a good quality, the gun can be fired. So we're not accomplishing anything by mandatory type of training. And now, if the individual wants to buy it and use it, that's their prerogative.
Now, I'm imagining in your mind a trigger lock is just a start.
That's the start, and actually manufacturers of shotguns now are saying they are making it with every gun sold. So even the manufacturers are bypassing what he's saying. They're going beyond. They see a problem. Remember 20 years ago you could buy a car that never had seat belts. Right. Now every car has seat belts. I mean, come on, let's move into the new century here. There's not only better material like that. If we can put a man on the moon, we can make a safer gun. We have smart gun.
I think we have even a question about these trigger locks.
Ann here, Scott. She's a teacher with the Pittsburgh City Schools. What is your question?
Who is going to enforce the use of any kind of a gun safety device? And how are the people who don't buy their gun legally going to actually put a safety device? Or how are we going to force them to put a safety device on their guns?
I think it has to start with the gun manufacturers and the people who sell it. Let's be responsible. Again, make them safe. My biggest issue is make them safe for kids. Get them out of the hands of kids, and if they do get a hold of them, make them safer. Again, the laws are there. There's plenty of laws. Let's enforce the laws we have. I agree with that. But I think let's start using good common sense. That's where it really comes in. And I think the NRA and some of the gun advocates, safety advocates, are too far apart. They just have to come together and start working together.
And when we see things as bad as what happened in Wilkinsburg, or as disconcerting as the young man who walked into a local middle school with a shotgun under his coat this week, that obviously upsets gun owners and non-gun owners. What do you hear from your members?
Well, we're concerned about that because we know, for one thing, a number of laws have been violated in every situation. The situation in Wilkinsburg, we must have had about 4 or 5 laws that were violated in Taylor. Now, we read in the paper statements that were saying the gun was legal. No, it wasn't. Once it was in possession of Taylor's hands, it was illegal.
His grandfather.
It was originally sold. The transfer was illegal. He in a sense, stole the firearm.
I understand. All right, Mike Slavonic and Bob O'Connor, thank you for joining us. Thank you. Sally, Mike.
All right, we want to call for that number again, if we may, for Goods for Guns. Those of you who were interested in turning in your guns for cash, 412 231-4101. There it is at the bottom of our screen.
And whatever side of the aisle you are on this issue, you can take part in Goods for Guns. They had drop-off sites last year in Homewood, the city of Pittsburgh, and Monroeville, and that they're going to add another site this year in Wilkinsburg.
All right, we do have another comment that has come into our web page. Something has to be done to take weapons off the streets in this nation. This is a comment I'm reading, by the way. The United States is the only country that guarantees its citizens the right to bear arms. Is it not possible that our society has exhausted its constitutional right to bear arms? That's a question that is being argued in Congress, in Washington, and across this nation right now. We're going to be back in just a moment with more on the race issue. Well, if you're browsing through the internet and did a search on Wilkinsburg, you would come upon a pleasant description of a tranquil town nestled in the east central portion of Allegheny County.
That's right, Sally. Wilkinsburg boasts having one of only 7 Pelzer statues of Abraham Lincoln, and it's also referred to as the city of churches with the largest number of religious congregations of people of all faiths. So how could something so terrible happen in such a God-fearing town? Joining us tonight is the mayor of Wilkinsburg, Wilbert Young, who has been very busy over the course of the last 2 weeks trying to rebuild and heal the community. How has Wilkinsburg begun to heal itself after this?
I think Sunday was an example of the people in the community coming together, supporting each other. I mean, immediately after this incident, I started getting calls from people in the community who I did not know, who were wondering what they can do to help. And it was like what goes on in the family when there's a tragedy. Folks begin to call and try to figure how they could support each other.
The NAACP has been criticized for not jumping on this and denouncing this act right away. How do you respond to that as a member of the Wilkinsburg chapter of the NAACP?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the NAACP did respond. And the thing is, I know that folks were wondering why they didn't respond immediately. But if you go back and look at the history of the NAACP, you see that they usually take a couple of days to respond, and they did, and that was good.
You need them to be a strong force in Wilkinsburg to make that healing happen, right?
Well, I mean, we think that we would like everyone to be a part of that. You know, the churches have taken the lead in terms of bringing the community together, and that seems right because, again, we are the city of churches, and the churches have for maybe the last 6 or 7 months been having a discussion of race between the clergy themselves and then their congregation. So we've been discussing the issue of race and
Mayor Young, image is so important in our society today. Where do you go from here? How do you change the image of Wilkinsburg after something like this?
Well, you know, we continue to work and do the things that we've been doing in the past. We think that we've come a long way over the last few years, and we think that we're doing things right. We think that most folks will see this as just something that was random. It was awful and it was random. It was something that we could not plan for. Around issues of public safety where we could plan, we've done well, and we'll continue to do that.
All right. Mayor Young, thank you for joining us. Scott?
Mike, the mayor was talking about the role of churches in that community, and certainly we have seen lots of church services, lots of memorial services and marches. One of the pastors of one of those churches is here with us tonight, Bill Cummings from Covenant Church of Pittsburgh. And you are not only a church in Wilkinsburg, but you are also a racially diverse church, which, you know, some people have said that the most segregated place in America is a church on Sunday morning. That's not true in your church.
No,
Why?
that's not true of our church. We have over 2,000 people come through our doors over the weekend, and it's very diverse culturally. And I'm the music pastor there, and I've just been in Pittsburgh for only about 1.5 years. I'm originally from Maryland.
So this has been a test from your church, but yes. Music can actually even be a point of healing in a church, can't it, in a crisis like this?
You know, I'm very much saddened about this incident that happened. And not only guns, certain things that influence our young people, but there's music. And what I have have in my heart to do is to go to each school that I possibly can, because music is medicine. There's violent music that our young kids are listening to today, and it's really infiltrating their minds and hearts.
Of agreement with you from around this audience.
And you know, they listen to the radio each day, and 99.5% of what they hear on the radio today is violent music. So it's taken over, and something must be done.
Let me ask you, L.A. Johnson, who is a writer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You wrote in the last week a thought-provoking article about black rage and some of the echoes that maybe we hear in some of that other music. And you talked about this sort of simmering feeling among many blacks, just that comes out of just years and decades and centuries of a feeling of social inequity. That may explain some of those feelings, but it certainly can't justify the actions that we've seen.
Oh, certainly not at all. In fact, we had the idea to examine this issue before Ronald Taylor ever happened, more as a reaction to Diallo.
Of that already.
More as a reaction to Diallo and some people's feelings about that verdict. In some ways, Ronald Taylor may turn out to be something completely different and maybe more akin to Colin Ferguson. I mean, it may be a matter of mental illness more than some planned hate activity. Hate was involved, but I don't know that it's the same thing as what we're talking about, or what I talked about in the article, certainly.
The same day that article was in the paper, there was an editorial piece by Earl Afari Hutchinson from the National Center for Positive Action. And he, Esther Bush, was actually very tough on the national black leadership for not being more firm, more persistently visible and vocal about the outrage of this. Did you agree with him on that point? Should there have been a greater statement by black leaders nationally in condemning this kind of violence?
I think nationally as well as locally that there was reaction that said this was tragic and there is no rational explanation for it, and it underscores the fact that Robert Taylor was mentally ill, and we have to put that up front. When we talk about the issue of race in America, all of us have to understand that race is something that continues to dominate in our society, and each and every one of us, by the way we live every day, the things we say and do every day, impacts how our world exists. And I think that Wilkinsburg is a fabulous example of how a community did come back because they were able to deal with the issue of race. Black and white came together to support each other during a time of tragedy.
And yet, tonight, you would understand why there might be people, whites or non-whites, who would be concerned when, for just the experience that we've had where someone from the NAACP had said they would have a representative here, and then a day before said, no, we're not going to come. That you would understand why that is something that may be hard for whites in the community to even understand.
I don't have the detail about why the NAACP representative is not here, but at the same time, I want to say that Tim Stevens in the NAACP called a press conference and made a statement similar to what I just stated. I know that Tim and I both went to Bishop Healy's memorial. I know that Tim was involved in Hosanna House and several other situations really that evolved around this horrible situation. So when people say, what else should they be doing? Why aren't they out front? I really get confused about the question. And I think that it's important for us to weigh out what is important. And the issue of race, because of the papers that were found and some other things, of course, we have to weigh all of those things out. But in terms of response and reaction, I say what else would have been appropriate or necessary when we do look at what actually did happen.
I understand. Michelle, you have a question.
I do have a comment, Scott, from Roland Jefferson. We were talking during the commercial break about some of the things that young black males face today.
Yes, as a member of Covenant Church of Pittsburgh, we were discussing about the frustration, the anger, some of the bitterness, resentment, and hostility that pushed this young man, Mr. Taylor, to the point where he had to act out to take somebody's lives, take lives. And there are so many young people, young black males in particular, and I'm speaking as a black male, as a father, as a grandfather, that are frustrated and to the brink of snapping or to the brink of going over the edge.
And what can we do to change that?
Well, there needs to be a reconciliation. We at Covenant Church, you know, we're very, very actively involved in the community. Hosanna House and with the school district, there needs to be more communication, more reconciliation. There needs to be communication among the races, because there's forces, as Pastor Bill was talking about, musical forces taking over our young people's minds and pushing people to the edge, and just their behavior is totally unpredictable. And consequently, it's Pittsburgh, Columbine, you know, all over the country is happening. And there needs to be, people need God in their life. You know, just don't have God in their life. They really do. They need God in their life.
Thank you, Roland. Scott?
You got a couple of amens around the audience. L.A. Johnson, I noticed in your article that that you talked with people of differing perspectives, including conservative black leaders like Walter Williams, who say there may be a lot of excuse-making, that ultimately, though, it is a matter of individual responsibility.
Yes, that was certainly Mr. Williams' opinion. And,
how resonant an idea is that?
I think that that's a very important idea, but at the same time, I think part of reconciliation and part of us moving forward is that when we sit across the table and we want to say, okay, tell me your issues, I'll tell you mine, you can't have someone sitting across the table from you saying, I don't believe what you say, or what you claim to have experienced I consider invalid, because when that happens, it's hard to move forward. And the Gallup poll that we quoted in the story indicated that blacks and whites have very different perceptions about how fairly blacks are treated in society. And if we can't even agree on what the real problem is, it's sort of hard to move forward from that.
Thank you, Michelle.
Adrian Young joins me now, and you lost your son to gun violence. Do you think that there is a possibility that this can change?
Well, I know that as long as, whether we're black or white or whatever race, that we put more value upon the monies that are made from these gun sales instead of human life, we're going to continue to have the same problem.
All right. Thanks for being here, and we'll be back right after this.
Boy, we've gotten some interesting emails from so many of you, and this one just coming in, noting what Mr. Laser talked about the need for responsibility, especially with children. The writer saying that children need to be taught to be accountable for their actions, and as parents, we need to help them learn this vital lesson.
That's a great way to end our show today.
That's right. As we mentioned earlier, if you missed any information presented this evening, check our website at thepittsburghchannel.com, or you can send us a self-addressed stamped envelope to A Crisis at Home, care of WTAE-TV, 400 Ardmore Boulevard, Pittsburgh, PA. The zip is 15221.
And we want to thank everybody for joining us. We'd like to thank our guests, our studio audience, and all of you at home. We hope this has been enlightening, and we welcome any feedback. Remember, what is the address again, Michelle?
ThePittsburghchannel.com. Please email us. And there are so many comments that we didn't get around to tonight. Heidi, right behind me, wanted to know how the media is involved, if the people who are committing these crimes might want to get some attention. And there are so many other things that need to be discussed.
Please,
so email us.
We need your feedback, your calls, to
Regular
email.
letters as well as email.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for watching tonight. Good night.
If you have a problem or need help, call for Action 333-444.